Mexican and U.S. officials discuss the surge of migrants at the southern border and what can be done to stop it. Hello, I'm Arnold Knight and this is The Heat. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Mexico's Foreign Secretary Alicia Barcena on Friday to discuss the record number of illegal crossings at the southern border and possible solutions. In 2023, U.S. Custom and Border Patrol agents encountered more than 2.5 million migrants. We begin with this report from CGTN's Alasdair Baverstock and the plight on the U.S. border city of Eagle Pass, Texas.
Eagle Pass on the US border with Mexico, a Texas town in the eye of a migrant crisis storm. After wading across the Rio Grande, migrants are met by US law enforcement for processing. Thousands of migrants have been crossing the US-Mexico border along this stretch of the Rio Grande on a daily basis, stretching local law enforcement and migration authorities to their limit. Tom Schmerber has been the local sheriff for 12 years and was a border patrol agent for 26 years before that. He says 2023's migrant situation has been extraordinary.
Never have I seen something like this in this area. I'm talking of more than 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people crossing. They're just walking and they're not running. They want to be apprehended. It's going to be more than 10, maybe 15,000 people coming in within a week. Unbelievable.
It's a situation that led the local government in Eagle Pass to declare a state of emergency, allowing the city to request additional federal funds to handle the crisis. For the Sheriff's Department, it's a matter of national security.
We need the help from the federal government. It's overwhelmed. The police department, they have like 70 officers. We have much less than that. Yeah, and the criminal element takes advantage of that. They know we're going to be tied up. And then at the same time, they're crossing drugs and all that to the other sides.
However, once processed and admitted into the US, the migrants don't remain here. Giuseppe Garcia from Caracas, Venezuela, is bound for Miami, where he'll have a court date to argue his case for asylum. He hopes this will be the final leg of a 4-month journey.
2 meses y medio en México.
I spent 2.5 months in Mexico and the situation there is devastating. I couldn't wait on an appointment at the border any longer. Crossing the river is the only option.
No hay otra forma.
But while these migrants have reached the United States, some don't survive the arduous journey. Indeed, the border itself has become one of the major dangers they face on their quest to reach America. Alasdair Baverstock, CGTN, Eagle Pass, Texas.
For more now on the US-Mexico border crisis, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Phoenix, Rafael Carranza is an immigration issues reporter for the Arizona Republic newspaper. Also with us from Austin, Texas, Todd Bensman is a senior national security fellow with the Center for Immigration Studies and author of Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in US History. Here in Washington, D.C., Abel Nunez is the executive director of the Central American Resource Center, or CARECEN, and Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for The Hill, where he covers Hispanic politics and global migration. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Rafael Bernal, that Mexican delegation that was led by the Foreign Secretary Alicia Barcena, they met with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken here in Washington on Friday, and that meeting comes just weeks after Blinken himself traveled to Mexico for talks with Mexican officials on the situation at the border. What do you know of what's come out of these meetings?
Well, it's a follow-up exactly of that meeting last month. The U.S.-Mexico relationship has historically been not transparent. When these meetings happen behind closed doors, they tend to keep not only the results of the meetings behind closed doors, but the way the relationship works is they segment different issues. So they won't be mixing immigration with trade. That obviously was broken for a while under former President Trump. What we do know is there's almost always a quid pro quo. And generally, what has happened after this sort of meeting, especially under President López Obrador and since President Trump changed the nature of the relationship somewhat, has been basically exporting human rights violations to Mexico, basically making Mexico do the dirty work so fewer people arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border. And frankly, that's what can be expected. That is basically the ability that the two governments have. They don't have that many tools at their disposal, given the 20 million people on the move in the Western Hemisphere.
Right, Todd, what's your view on what took place? Because if we look at the number of crossings at the southern border, we've seen a sharp drop. It's now 4,000 or 5,000, and in November and December, it was as high as 14,000. Why this drop?
Well, what we're seeing is since the shuttle diplomacy between Blinken and the president and Obrador, the Mexican military, the federales, the immigration services have been rounding up thousands and thousands of migrants from all of the northern border cities, putting them on buses and shipping them down to Tapachula in the southern state of Chiapas, and also Tabasco, also loading them onto airplanes, flight after flight after flight down there, setting up roadblocks throughout northern Mexico, bulldozing migrant camps to deny space for the immigrants. But most importantly, in interdicting the flow and slowing it down, is that the Mexican government now is blocking access to the freight trains, La Bestia, the network of trains that hundreds of thousands of immigrants have been using to transport themselves to the northern border. Those are now being blocked at the depots in major cities, and they're also rousting immigrants off of the trains when they come to a stop. Most of this is all happening, they're being shipped down and blocked down in the Tapachula area, kind of creating something that looks like a Gaza Strip in a way, and requiring them to apply for these long, slow, bureaucratic processes to get papers to finally move. And they also are deporting some now by air to home countries. So a lot has happened. I don't know what the quid pro quo was. Your prior guest said that things are never transparent. In this case, something happened for sure. We just don't know what it is.
And Todd, as you say, many of these migrants were moved forcibly from the north of Mexico to the south. Do you know anything about their fate in the southern states?
Well, we've seen this before. I mean, under Donald Trump, you know, he came at the Mexican president with a big stick, trade tariffs, and said, if you don't slow roll them down there in the south, then we're going to ruin your economy, basically. In the Biden era, he switched to carrots. You know, we'll pay you security assistance and all the rest of this if you just hold them down there. But the result was that under that system, Obrador just stabbed the president in the back over and over again and would just release 30, 40,000 at a time, but make sure that they spread across 10 or 15 different cities and states in northern Mexico so that Fox News drones couldn't see them and report it in these big congregations. And so I guess as long as Obrador was releasing them like that, it was okay. Nobody complained. So that's what'll happen is they will riot down there. There will be great unrest in Tapachula and Villahermosa and elsewhere until the government releases them to go forward. They'll try to set up caravans and all the rest of that. It's going to get ugly. Biden is having Obrador do his dirty work for sure.
Abel, Nunez, talking about quid pro quo, the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, he seems to be driving a very hard bargain with the United States on this immigration issue. He's called for $20 billion in aid to Latin American and Caribbean countries. He wants a suspension of the U.S. blockade of Cuba, a removal of all sanctions against Venezuela, and he wants the United States to grant 10 million Hispanics in this country the right to live here, the right to work here legally. Is that what the pro quo is?
I think that there are other pro quos that the Mexican government is interested in, but I think we have to realize that the immigration system in the U.S. has been broken for years. And it's a very political issue that serves political parties, both on the left and the right. Right now, we're having negotiations where Republicans have stated that they'd rather not complete a negotiation because they like the issue, right? But what we have to remember that these are people. And I want to clarify something. Most people do not want to leave their country of origin, but they're forced to leave. But we also have a situation in the United States where our economy needs these workers. Currently, we have about 9.6 million jobs available with only 5 million people looking or actively looking for work in the industries where immigrants have historically entered, construction, healthcare, hospitality. So I think that there's a real hypocrisy here of blaming the immigrants for situations that have been put in place, historical situations that have been politicized, but who the only ones that are harmed are the immigrants. And they are the ones that are coming in that are going to really support our economy. But one of the things that we have to remember, and I think we have to go back to the previous president, it is who's coming in. If this were people from the northern regions of Europe, white, I don't think we would be having these issues. We saw the differential treatment of how Ukrainians have been treating versus Haitians. And so I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy in the process. There's a broken system. And unfortunately, immigrants are trying to negotiate it as best they can. And other entities like Mexico are take advantage of the situation for their own benefit, for their own agendas in their own countries.
Right, it certainly is a big political issue, especially in this election year. Rafael Carranza, the Biden administration promised about 3 years ago to address what they termed the root causes of migration. Biden appointed his vice president, Kamala Harris, as his point person to deal with that, to oversee these efforts, especially in the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. There was also talk of big investments in these countries, investments that would provide more jobs in these countries, would make living conditions better in those countries. Whatever happened to those efforts?
We don't have exact details or can point to results about those conversations. Certainly, a lot was made when the announcements were first made about having many companies in the U.S. that were called or signed up to provide opportunities in these countries. However, the situation has relatively not changed for many of the individuals that are leaving those countries. They still point, in my conversations with migrants that are arriving at the border here in Arizona, I hear constantly about security concerns and other economic hardships that they still continue to face to this day. So whatever efforts are being done at the moment, they're certainly not having the impact that I think the U.S. had originally intended, because it's still resulting in the mass movement of people. And I think that particularly what you get is that when you have individuals moving and migrants reaching the United States, they cross the border, and then they kind of signal back to their relatives or friends back home that they've done it, and so then they follow suit as well. And so this word of mouth kind of process has continued over the course of the past 3 years, and anticipate that will continue until there's some sort of meaningful action. I think even the Biden administration's efforts to create lawful pathways for migrants to reach the United States, even though it's had some success with certain nationalities, it has meant that you then have migrants from other countries that are not a part of these lawful pathways reaching the United States. And I think, as we saw, for example, in Ecuador, where there was turmoil over the course of the past few weeks, there's fear that even more people could then flee those situations and make their way through Latin America to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. But already there's thousands of people that are already in movement throughout Central America and Mexico. And so, a lot will depend on what Mexico does from their immigration enforcement approach. But certainly, we anticipate that more people will continue arriving along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Rafael Bernal, the U.S. Congress, members of Congress have been working on a border security package, but they want that included in a bigger funding bill. The lawmakers that hasn't worked. The lawmakers have just passed a stopgap funding bill. Didn't address the situation as far as migration was concerned. So where does that leave that security package right now?
So you have those two separate bills. The stopgap bill was really for the government budget, the general government budget, and then you have the supplemental bill where the White House made a strategic decision last year to put together border security, Ukraine aid, Israel aid, and Indo-Pacific aid targeted at Taiwan, specifically Taiwan aid. And by putting all these together, they, immigration advocates say the Biden administration made a huge mistake because now all of those sectors that are strategically important to President Biden are tied down in this negotiation over the border. Traditionally, as we know, Congress is not good at legislating on border and immigration, but Republicans have taken the opportunity to really extract some very big demands that Democrats would traditionally not give unless they were getting some softening of immigration policy. Now, every time that's the quid pro quo, to return to that, legislation has ultimately failed. In some cases, when the Senate has attempted to tighten border security without tying it to immigration reform, namely in 96 and 2006, they have passed legislation. But it seems like things are heading in that direction. But where immigration advocates are very angry is that both the 96 and 2006 laws are seen by them as the laws that broke the system. That this manner of legislating is what broke the system in the first place, and like your other guest said, to the detriment of migrants above anyone else.
Rafael, you say Republicans wanted huge concessions on this issue, but on immigration itself, what do they want? What is the holdup?
Well, apparently what there is agreement on is restrictions on asylum, on who can claim asylum, how quickly, whether they're free, whether people are returned to Mexico, that sort of thing. Apparently there's some form of agreement. We don't know exactly what's being negotiated, and that's very important. But what appears to be the stopping point is the president's right to parole individual or groups of immigrants, or migrants rather, of foreign nationals, to be precise, into the country. That parole authority is used for a myriad of reasons, humanitarian help, to bring somebody into an American hospital who doesn't have a visa, for instance, to give papers to the undocumented spouse of a U.S. citizen. That's a pretty common use of parole. But the Biden administration has used it for rather large classes of foreign nationals, like Venezuelans, Haitians, and that's where they're tied up.
Todd, talking about the politics of all of this, there was a poll done by the United States television network CBS, which found that 68% of those surveyed disapproved of President Biden's policies, his border policies, that is, and 63% want him to get a lot tougher. They're looking for something like a crackdown on migrants crossing the border. I mean, how big an issue is this going to be in the run-up to the November election?
Well, we're seeing polls, not just that one, but I guess all polls are on that issue are showing deep dissatisfaction among the even Democratic Party constituencies, classic constituencies all across the country that are seeing these millions and millions of people pour into their cities. Especially in Democratic precincts in the North, Chicago, New York, Boston, and the cities are then diverting huge sums of money to illegal immigrants or people that are here on a very temporary basis. And there's a lot of anger over that. You can see this in any Chicago assembly chamber on meeting night. Black constituents just packing in there saying, we are voting Republican next time, you have lost us. that sort of thing. And I guess the question is really, will they actually vote that way? Will their anger translate into voting? We are seeing the Biden campaign cutting deals, I believe, with the Mexican government to slow those numbers down from now till the election, I believe because the Biden campaign believes that they are at risk. Remember that Donald Trump won one presidency on this issue already. And with polling numbers like this and Trump appearing to be heading for the nomination on the Republican side, I think there's a lot of consternation in the Biden campaign that this could be, especially in a razor-thin margin of win or loss, this could be the thing that tips it over the edge for Trump. That's why you've got Obrador down there busing thousands of migrants down to Tapachula today.
Right. Abel, you know, it is a hot-button political issue. Republicans are also now trying to impeach the Secretary for Homeland Security, Alexander Mayorkas. They accuse him of dereliction of duty at the border, and we will know in a few weeks if that impeachment is going to go through. Mayorkas himself has been defending his policies. This is what he had to say. Let's listen to that.
What we are experiencing at the southern border is not unique to the southern border or to the United States. The entire hemisphere is gripped with a level of migration that is unprecedented in recent history. In fact, it is something that is gripping the entire world. Number two, we are dealing with fundamentally a broken immigration system and one that has been in dire need of repair for more than 3 decades.
So, Abel, what do you make of what the Secretary had to say there, and what purpose would impeaching him serve on the broader question of reforming and fixing this system?
Well, it serves the needs of the Republican Party that cannot point to anything that they've done in this current Congress. So they're heading into an election with nothing to give to their constituencies, but they have an issue that's getting traction, as your guests have mentioned, and it's getting traction up outside of the Republican Party, right? Because it's a situation that's causing a lot of chaos unnecessarily. Like the Secretary said, the movement of people is not something that is not unknown. The U.S. could have prepared for this. And by the way, we do need the immigrants coming in. Our economy needs these immigrants so that we can continue to be a strong and vibrant economy. But because of the politics and because of who's coming, I think one of the things that we cannot forget is the demographic change that this country is facing, that by 2040, the dominant culture, white European, will become a minority, and the U.S. will become a majority minority nation. And I think that that really scares a lot of people of what that means for this nation. And so they can easily pick on immigrants. That is the one thing that can do. And because the system is broken and it creates chaos, it can easily serve the needs, the political needs of parties as they're trying to get elected. And it's unfortunate because this could be a win-win situation for the immigrants, for the United States, for our security. But unfortunately, people cannot come together and create a system that can serve.
Rafael Carranza, you have reported widely on immigration. You've talked to people who often make this very dangerous trip, heading north, trying to cross the United States border. And as Todd told us a moment ago, now they run the risk of being moved back to the south of Mexico as well. But when you talk to them, what do they tell you about the reasons they're moving north for?
I think that there are, several. I think that most of them kind of fall under two particular reasons. I think you have economic reasons. They're looking for better opportunities in the United States. Obviously, you have an economy in the U.S. that, as guests have mentioned, have a lot of openings, and they're looking for opportunities or ways to advance their family's future. So that I think is a big driving force or big pull factor for a lot of the migrants coming to the United States. Another one is security concerns. You have cartel activity in a lot of different places throughout Latin America. Because you have such a large movement of people, you also have smuggling networks, gang issues that kind of have arisen. And if people are not able to live a safe, stable life in those countries, they're going to look for opportunities elsewhere. So I think those are kind of like the two main camps that I've heard in my conversations with migrants when they reach the border, is that they're either looking for economic opportunities or they're looking for refuge, safety in the United States. Of course, U.S. laws, I think, are very clear at the moment that, in terms of seeking asylum, that has very specific circumstances, and not everyone kind of falls under those. But because the system is so backlogged, it could take years before any determination is made on any specific case.
Rafael Bernal, there are those Democrats in both the U.S. House as well as the U.S. Senate who are proposing amnesties this year, which would give migrants a legal path to live here legally, take up legal residence, and possibly a path to citizenship as well. It has been done before. Republican administrations have offered amnesties. Is that going to carry? Is that going to go for this year in an election year?
Well, amnesty itself became a political bad word after, in 1986, Ronald Reagan did provide amnesty. At the time, it was seen as a good word. It's obviously very biblical. It should have a positive connotation. But after that, it became politicized as something unduly given to non-law abiding foreign nationals. That's how it became perceived. But there is truth that there are groups of undocumented immigrants who have been here for 20 or something years, who have otherwise been right with the law, who have been paying taxes, because undocumented immigrants can pay taxes and do pay taxes often. And there's a sense that many of these people have decades of life in this country, are pretty much Americans at this point, whatever that means. And yes, there is a push for amnesty. No, it doesn't have very strong political legs.
Right. Todd, very quickly, I've only got 30 seconds. We have seen something of a power struggle between states, border states, and the federal government. We saw that in Texas, where the federal government went to court to stop Texas from erecting a barrier at the border there. Are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see states take the law into their own hands if this is not fixed?
No, I think we're going to see Texas do it, not New Mexico, Arizona, or California, because those are Democratic governors. But you will see a lot more of it in Texas. I think that this is a classic states' rights versus federal conflict, and Texas Governor Greg Abbott has got his people down there blocking him at the river. The immigrants know that the green uniforms will let them in.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.